It's a psychological truth that the most terrifying monsters don't hide in dark alleys. They live in the house next door. They wave to you on your morning walk. They sit across from you at the dinner table. It was a crisp morning in Broomfield, Colorado. 43-year-old Kristil Krug had just finished the chaotic routine of getting her 3 children ready for school, poured her morning coffee, and stepped out into her garage. In a few moments, her mother would walk into this exact space and stumble into a waking nightmare. Kristil never even had time to turn her key in the ignition. Someone was already waiting inside the darkness of that garage. The trap had been set for months, and on this morning it snapped shut. And this is Daniel Krug, her husband. Just minutes after his wife's lifeless body was concealed inside their own home, Daniel was driving to his office, preparing for another completely ordinary day at work. For the past 4 months, this man had been quietly engineering the most meticulous, highly calculated homicide plot the state of Colorado had ever seen. He was creating entirely fake digital identities, manipulating his own children, tracking his wife's movements, and systematically setting up the perfect scapegoat to take the fall for a murder he was planning to commit. Daniel believed his plan was entirely bulletproof. He believed that when the smoke cleared, the police would spend months chasing a digital ghost and eventually arrest an innocent man. And despite nearly flawless detective work, his plan worked exactly the way he intended. To anyone looking from the outside, the Krug family had achieved the American dream. Both Kristil and Daniel were well-educated, successful professionals who built a comfortable, affluent life together. They were active in their community, deeply devoted to their 3 young kids, and seemingly solid. But behind closed doors, a dark anomaly was beginning to tear this beautiful family apart. It started with a sense of being watched. Kristil began noticing strange patterns in her day, cars that seemed to linger too long behind her, an unsettling feeling that followed her to the grocery store, the gym, and the office. Then came the anonymous messages. A faceless stalker had become completely obsessed with her, sending constant threats and claiming to watch her every move. The terror became so overwhelming that local law enforcement was called to the residence. An officer meticulously checked her vehicle top to bottom, searching for hidden GPS trackers or magnetic bugs that could explain how this phantom stalker knew her exact coordinates. But the search came up completely empty. The officer offered standard safety tips, promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood, and left. They had no idea that the real tracker was much closer than anyone could have imagined. Not long after, the Broomfield police received another call from the Krug home, this time from Daniel. He reported a highly disturbing home invasion. According to him, an intruder had slipped into the house while they were away. Oddly, nothing valuable was taken, no electronics, no cash, no jewelry. The only thing missing was their spare house key. The responding officer warned Daniel that if an intruder took a key, they weren't done, they were planning to return. He strongly advised changing the deadbolts immediately. What no one realized that night was that this break-in was completely fabricated. It was the opening move of a grandmaster chess strategy, and the missing key was step 1. 9 days after Daniel reported the break-in, his wife Kristil wakes up to another uneasy morning. For weeks now, she's been receiving strange anonymous messages and a growing sense that someone out there has an eye on her. Until now, none of it had a name attached but a faceless presence that kept getting closer. But today, that changes. As Kristil gets the kids ready for school, makes her morning coffee, and heads out for work, her phone buzzes. On the screen was a name she hadn't thought about in over 20 years, Jack Anthony Holland, a man she had briefly dated as a teenager. The message was short, blunt, and completely out of nowhere. "Hi Kristil, it's Anthony. Hope it's okay, I looked you up. I go to Boulder every few weeks and thought we could hook up. You game?" At first, Kristil brushed it off as an awkward blast from the past. He had been harmless when they were kids. She ignored it and went about her day. But 24 hours later, the tone mutated into something deeply unstable. "Are you there? You should say yes when I offer pity. Whatever, I saw your pics. You got fat. Saw you at the dentist today. Your license plate expired. Gotta fix that." The realization hit Kristil like a physical blow. The anonymous stalker who had been haunting her steps for weeks wasn't a stranger, it was Anthony. And he was actively tracking her in real time. Her life transformed into a state of hypervigilance. She turned her home into a fortress, installing surveillance cameras at every angle, mounting dashcams in her vehicle, and obtaining a concealed carry permit. She carried a loaded handgun everywhere she went. By late October, paralyzed by fear and barely sleeping, she began keeping a highly detailed digital spreadsheet log, meticulously documenting every message, timestamp, and IP address she could find. Then, a new email arrived that pushed Kristil over the edge. It read, "This your husband drives like a slow old lady. He needs to drive safe." Attached was a fresh, covert photograph of Daniel taken outside his workplace. The stalker was no longer just watching her, he was hunting her family. Out of options, Kristil hired a private investigator to track down Anthony Holland's digital footprint, and on Halloween night, she made a desperate call to law enforcement. The case file landed on the desk of Detective Andrew Martinez, a highly seasoned investigator known for tackling Broomfield's most complex and violent crimes. When Martinez sat down with Kristil the following week, he realized he was dealing with an incredibly sophisticated threat. Two major red flags immediately stood out to the detective. First, the stalker was a ghost in the machine. He wasn't texting from a single burner phone. He was utilizing multiple spoofed lines, VPN networks, and shifting digital identities to bypass every single block Kristil set up. Whoever this was, they possessed an alarming amount of technical resourcefulness and malicious determination. Second, the private investigator's report showed that Anthony Holland was tied to a chaotic web of multiple transient addresses and disconnected phone numbers. He was living completely off the grid, making him a nightmare to physically locate. While waiting for tech companies to return data from the digital warrants, Martinez decided to follow up on the bizarre house key burglary. He brought Daniel Krug into the station for a formal interview to see if Daniel had noticed anyone lurking around his own workplace. Instead of clarifying the investigation, this interview would introduce a deeply troubling layer to the Krug household. Daniel sat in the interrogation room, projecting the image of a defeated, frantic husband. He casually dropped a piece of information that made Detective Martinez's internal radar flare. Daniel admitted that despite the intense stalking campaign starting in early October, Kristil hadn't told him about it for a full month. Not until she received that specific threat containing the photo of him at work. When Martinez pushed further, asking why there was such a massive communication gap, Daniel sighed and revealed that their marriage was in a severe rough patch. They were on the rocks, quietly discussing a separation, but trying to keep it together for the children. Daniel then explained how he was panicking, buying extra cameras, and carrying a retractable steel baton at all times because he felt he was doing a terrible job protecting his wife. Martinez wrapped up the interview, but a cold thought lingered in his mind. He looked at the fractured marriage. He looked at how conveniently the stalker's threats escalated exactly when the couple was drifting apart. For a brief moment, Martinez wondered, could a desperate husband fabricate a terrifying stalker to scare his wife, making her dependent on him to fix a failing marriage? But there was zero proof. Kristil Truths firmly believed Anthony was the culprit, and all circumstantial signs pointed squarely at the unhinged ex-boyfriend. Then, in early December, Kristil received a message that felt like a miracle. "Hey gorgeous, I can't visit you anymore, no more Colorado time. My girlfriend doesn't want us talking. She says you'll let the cops get me after you get rid of him." For the first time in 4 agonizing months, the Krug family breathed a sigh of relief. The stalker was backing off. The nightmare was finally fading. But in the lexicon of true crime, a sudden drop in a stalker's compliance is never a relief. It is the final clearing of the runway. The morning of the incident started like any other Tuesday. Daniel kissed his family goodbye and left for his office. Shortly after, Kristil loaded the kids into her car to drop them off at school. During those precise minutes when the house sat completely empty, a dark silhouette approached the front porch. He didn't break a window. He didn't kick down the door. He pulled a roll of blue masking tape from his pocket, placed a smooth strip directly over the lens of the Ring doorbell camera, and calmly unlocked the front door using the spare house key that had been reported stolen 4 months prior. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Minutes later, Kristil returned from the school run, pulled into the garage, and let the heavy garage door slide shut behind her. She turned off the ignition, grabbed her purse, and stepped out into the enclosed space. She never even saw him coming. The attacker ambushed her immediately, striking her in the head, stabbing her in the chest, and leaving her to bleed out onto the concrete floor. Tucked securely inside her purse, entirely untouched, was the concealed handgun she had carried for months but never had a single second to reach for. Hours later, after claiming he couldn't reach his wife all morning, Daniel called the police for a welfare check. At the exact same time, he phoned Kristil's mother, Linda, asking her to drive over and check on her daughter, sending an innocent woman directly into the worst moment of her life. First responders arrived first. Peering through the glass panels of the garage door, an officer spotted a motionless female body on the floor with blood smeared violently across the drywall. "I've got a female down in the garage. Send medical right now." Forcing entry, the officer kicked the unlocked front door open, rushed into the garage, and began desperate, exhausting CPR. As he opened the main garage door to give incoming paramedics access, Kristil's mother pulled into the driveway. She caught a brief, horrific glimpse of an officer frantically pumping the chest of her lifeless daughter before other officers physically pulled her away, shielding her from the nightmare. When Daniel arrived on the scene, his performance was flawless. He hyperventilated, collapsed, screamed out in agony, and put on a masterclass of a devastated, broken husband who had failed to protect his family. Officers treated him with immense care, comforting him as a victim. But as forensic investigators processed the scene, the neat narrative Daniel had built began to split at the seams. They found the blue tape on the camera. They found the completely undamaged locks on the front door. The crime wasn't impulsive. It was an execution by someone who possessed an intimate, internal key to the household. And then, the ultimate hammer dropped. The forensic digital warrants Detective Martinez had filed weeks ago finally returned data from the tech companies. Investigators sat down to map the highly complex web of burner phone applications, anonymous email accounts, and spoofed lines used by the terrifying stalker Anthony Holland. They expected to find IP addresses tracing back to transient motels or out-of-state servers. Instead, every single piece of digital terrorism, every threatening text, every venomous email, and even the covert photo taken of Daniel at his own workplace, traced back to a single localized IP footprint. The messages had all been sent from secondary administrative accounts created, paid for, and operated from the personal devices of Daniel Krug. Colorado's smartest killer had spent 4 terrifying months stalking his own wife. He had terrorized the mother of his children, watched her lose sleep, watched her carry a gun in fear, all to build an elaborate, airtight ghost story. He manufactured a phantom monster so that when he finally took her life, an innocent man from her past would take the blame. But in the end, the digital trail he used to construct his perfect crime became the exact noose that tightened around his own neck. Daniel Krug was arrested, stripped of his carefully crafted mask, and charged with the first-degree murder of Kristil Krug.